All right, everyone. Jeremy Knopf here with another episode of the Public Relations Declassified Livestream. Got a couple of stories we're going to jump into here today. Not so much stories, more tutorials, lessons, whatever you'd like to call it. And we've also got an interesting example. I don't yet know if it is a mistake or if it was done intentional, but a really interesting example of using juvenile humor to get a lot of people talking about a particular topic. So we're going to go ahead and jump into it by talking about how to give a quote that a journalist will actually use in their story. Now, this is an important topic because I see a lot of people get this wrong. They will ask a journalist question, or answer a journalist's questions, but they're doing it in a way that's very self-serving. It's not bringing value to the audience. It's not really providing anything of substance. And as a result of that, that quote often doesn't end up getting used, right? So you go through all the time and effort of, reaching out and pitching a journalist, or even if they reached out to you, you go through all that time and effort of crafting your response, being interviewed, or just emailing them back with the information. Whatever the case may be, they go through all this time and effort to create the response, and then it doesn't get included, right? So this is a huge waste of time, and that's why you need to get it right so that all that effort turns into an actual media feature that presents you as an authority in your industry. Now, this is something I've been involved with a bunch. Obviously we've got our clients that we do PR for. We get them featured. We go through the whole process of really extracting their knowledge and turning it into great answers that bring a lot of value, exactly the kind of answers that a journalist wants to see because it provides value to their audience. But from time to time, I do have scenarios where a journalist will reach out to me and they need an expert on a particular topic. I don't have a client that does that. So often what I will do is I will reach out to my network, find somebody who's an expert on whatever that is they need, right? Because I always do my best to go above and beyond and give journalists, whatever help and support I can. And so when these scenarios pop up, I'm reaching out to somebody who I probably already know, but they have not gone through our process. They do not know how to structure their answers. They don't know how to give answers that a journalist is going to love. So a lot of times in those situations, or when people are handling their own PR, the answers suck and then they don't get featured. So I had one not too long ago where we needed a particular expert on something kind of niche in the real estate space. Knew a great guy, very solid person, great operator, great integrity, just good person all the way around. So I reached out to him, got an answer from him. This was via email, late at night on a weekend several months ago. And the answer that he gave was basically just a giant pitch for his company, right? It wasn't technically, it was answering the question, but not doing so in a meaningful way. So I had to spend a bunch of time getting that really dialed in. Fortunately, I knew his business fairly well. I knew what he did. I knew how he did it. I knew his principles, all of that. So what I ended up doing was just writing the quote, sending it to him, and then saying, here, are you good to go with this? Does this need any edits? And we structured it in a way that then resulted in him getting featured in a tier 1 media outlet. In this case, it was Newsmax. But as a result of framing it properly, he ended up getting this killer feature that really positioned him as an authority. Had we gone with his answer and just sent that off to the journalist, there's no way he would have been included. There was nothing of value in that answer. And that's not a reflection on him or his capability. He's an expert on what he's an expert on. The PR side is something that he's not an expert on, obviously. So this is something I see a lot of people make, and wanted to give you guys some tips on how to avoid this, how to give a journalist an answer that's going to be really useful for their audience, which then makes it infinitely more likely that that does end up turning into a media feature. So one of the first mistakes that I see people make in this area all the time is saying too much. Now, if you're an entrepreneur of any sort, you already understand this concept from a sales perspective, right? The whole thing about the person who talks the most or the person who talks first loses in a negotiation. There's kind of an analogy here where if you talk too much, you're going to do two things. One is you're going to make it seem like you're maybe not as confident as you could be or as you should be, based on the level of experience that you're supposed to have. So usually if somebody is not confident, they're going to over-explain things. They're going to talk about a lot of things they've done. They're going to talk about their achievements. They're going to try and prove who they are. Whereas somebody who is more confident is mostly going to just stick to the facts, get down to the details, but they're not going to sit there and try and turn it into, here's everything that makes me the best person in the world, right? And so people will often try to fill any little moments of silence, any little voids in the conversation with more information, thinking that this is going to persuade someone. In reality, it actually reduces your credibility. Now, that doesn't mean that you just sit down and give monosyllabic answers, right? We're not just going to give very simple, very basic answers and just, kind of create this fake aloof persona, because that's not good either. But the thing is, journalists, they don't have all day, right? I've got a client who, great guy, amazing human, brilliant businessman, runs a fairly substantial private equity firm, close to 800 million in assets under management. There will never be a day where I will have him talk to a journalist by himself, because he will just talk and talk and talk and just go on every single tangent you can possibly imagine. And there's not a journalist in the world who's got time for that. So, just for context, typically when we schedule a call with him, if I need a 30-minute window, if I need to extract information from his brain, and I anticipate this should take 30 minutes, I will usually schedule at least an hour or an hour and a half, right? So that's the kind of thing that can destroy a PR opportunity. So, you want to get to the point. You want to get to the meat of the answer, what it is the journalist wants to provide to their audience, and get right into that. Don't waste a bunch of time beating around the edges. Don't waste a bunch of time, telling your entire backstory and everything you've ever accomplished. Keep it nice and tight. If they want more information, they will ask. But if you just steamroll the conversation, talking nonstop, it's going to put you in a bad spot. And then you have to remember that your story, right, could be any aspect of that. It could be your background. It could be what you've achieved or what you're working towards, or any number of things. Your story might be huge to you, but it's just one of countless other stories to them. So no matter how cool you may think it is, no matter how amazing even your industry may think it is, you need to make it stand out to somebody that doesn't have a vested interest in your story, right? Which obviously includes the journalists. So to make it stand out, yes, of course, you have to be better than your competitors. That's a given. The better you can be, the more powerful your story is, the more relevant and credible you are. But more important than that is you need to be different. So this is a topic that I covered in my column at Entrepreneur a while back. And being different is actually more important than being better. So look at Apple, for example. I don't care where you stand on the whole Apple versus PC debate. The reality is Apple is not a better computer, even though many people think that it is. What's different in this case is that Apple is different. There's nothing inherently better about an Apple. From a specs perspective, an Apple computer is priced higher than a comparably spec computer, that is a, like a Windows PC. So the key differentiation is they've basically created a cult around the differences of Apple, right? And there's a lot of things that they've done in that whole process. That's actually something I should probably break down on one of these future episodes. But they're not better. They're just different. And when you're different, you give people a reason to take note of you, to take a look at what you're doing, and to be drawn to you and what you're doing. The other side of this also I want to touch on here is the fact that the more that you say, the more work you're actually putting on that journalist. So the more talking that you do, the more that they have to sift through to extract out what's going to be really great, right? Because if you look at a typical interview for a media feature, you might have a 15, 30, even a 60-minute interview, depending on the circumstances. Think about how many words end up in that conversation. And then look at most of the media features that you see. And I can promise you the delta between what was said and what made it into the finished piece is massive. So you have to go through this process thinking in tight, concise bullet points, right? Little sound bites, things that are going to be very impactful, things that are going to really resonate with people. So we want to say things that might be a little bit controversial. We want to kill the sacred cows, so to speak. We want to call certain people out. We want to say certain things that are going to get people emotionally invested. And we want to do that in tight little sound bites that can easily be quoted. Now, this is something that obviously takes time and it takes practice to get good at. But the more effectively you can do this, the more impactful your statement's going to be. So they'll be more likely to end up in these media features. And on top of that, it also makes their job a hell of a lot easier. So think about it like this. If a journalist interviews one guy and it's like pulling teeth and he just talks and talks and talks and rambles and doesn't really get to the point, versus another expert source who has these tight, pithy little sound bites that really resonate with people, and the communication is super clear and it's easy to understand, and people can take bits of it and convey a powerful message with a small chunk without having to try and break down a 6-paragraph run explaining a topic, right? Obviously, the journalist is going to go with the person who is more effective in that interview. So the more often that you get these powerful interviews, the more likely that additional journalists are going to reach out and want to interview you, but also the more likely the ones who have already interviewed you will be to come back and interview you again, right? Because if you're an expert and you're easy to work with, then there's a good chance they're just going to keep going back to you because you've already demonstrated that A, you are an expert, and B, you're making their job easier, right? And that's part of the reason that I've developed some of the relationships I have where when a journalist interviews one of our clients, or even somebody that's not a client that I bring to the table for them, we get them really prepped beforehand so that when a journalist interviews them, it is so easy for them to do their job. We also do some additional things behind the scenes to, take most of the heavy lifting off of their shoulders. But because we're making their job so much easier, they keep coming back time and time again. I've got journalists who they will reach out to me, text, phone call, email, whatever, and say, hey, do you happen to have an expert on XYZ, right? And because I make it super easy for them, they come back frequently, and they end up featuring our clients in a lot of stuff. So making their job easier plays a huge role in this. One of the other mistakes that I see is people not saying enough, right? It's the other side of this same coin. So why is this a problem? Well, it's a problem because a lot of people look at it from the perspective of, well, if I give away everything, if I tell people all the answers, then they're not going to need me. There could be a case made for that, but it's mostly bullshit. The reality is, if you're going to be featured in the media, you have to actually provide valuable information. Nobody's going to cite you to say something that doesn't bring any value to their audience. But the other side of this is, who cares if somebody takes the information that you give and uses it without ever hiring you? Those people were never going to hire you in the first place. If you're giving away your information, you're now providing value to the audience. That is what journalists need. So by giving them the answers, you're actually helping yourself just as much as them, because you're then getting that media feature. You're going to be spotlighted as an expert. And the reality is, it doesn't matter how much information you give. You could sit down all day and do an 8-hour interview, and the New York Times could publish the entire thing on the front page. But no matter how much information you talked with them about in this 8-hour interview, there's still a million things that somebody who needs your products or services would not know, right? You've got years or decades of experience doing what you do. So no matter how deeply you talk about a particular topic, there's still a million things you didn't get a chance to talk about. So you're not really throwing away opportunities. You're not really giving people the opportunity to cut you out of the equation. What you're actually doing is demonstrating that you are an expert, and the people who would hire you potentially will see your expertise. And if they're going to reach out to somebody for this, then you're a lot more likely to be that person. But the people who are just going to use it for free, they were never going to hire you in the first place. So you're not losing anything out here, right? Now, when we're answering these questions, we want to be useful, right? We're not just giving them super simple answers. We're not just giving them high-level stuff. We're going to get down into the nuts and bolts, get down into the details. So what you want is for the audience to be able to do something or avoid something with your information. So I talked about the guy who was not a client that we put in one of the features, and he kind of botched it in the answers that he sent us via email. Part of the problem was he was making it all about his company. You know, here's what we do, and here's why we're the best, when that wasn't really what the journalist was looking for. They were looking for specific, actionable information. So we reframed that to, instead of really being about his company, it was more about how his company handles a particular problem. And that accomplished two things. One, it gave the audience exactly what they wanted, but it also gave them actionable information that they could take and implement in their business, even if they never worked with this particular person. Carol Roth had a great example of this as well. So I've talked about her a bunch on the show. She's a good friend of mine, great person, one of the smartest humans that you will ever meet. And when all of this CTA, BOI stuff was going on, Congress was passing legislation trying to make this reporting a requirement. She got out there and started talking about exactly what it was, exactly how it works, exactly how it will affect business owners. And she kind of led the charge on eventually getting that repealed. But at no point did she say, well, hey, this is a really bad thing, and then just like leave it at that, or say, yeah, you need to do something about this. She got into the specifics. She explained every single detail. Now, her business did not revolve around that at all. She's got several businesses of her own, right? She's an entrepreneur, but she has basically been kind of a voice for the small business community. So she got out here and just shared this information. No real monetary benefit to her, but it did create a shitload of publicity for her, because whenever anyone was talking about the topic, she was always the first person people would go to because of all of the information she had shared about it. She had kept tabs on the legislation as it was working its way through, and she shared just tons and tons of information that millions of people could go take that information, use it to protect themselves, use it to avoid the liabilities that come with this proposed legislation, use it to avoid the penalties, all of that. And she basically just gave all of the information away. And that's a great way to handle it, right? We need to really give useful, actionable information. All right. The other thing we have to do here, though, is we have to be original. So I can't tell you how many people I have seen who will get out here and parrot the same industry talking points, right? They're not saying anything new. They're just repeating what everyone else is saying. And they think that they're going to get turned into a superstar for simply repeating what everyone else is saying. No one wants to hear the same shit that everyone else is already saying. So this doesn't work. You need a fresh take. Now, authenticity is key here. This is not the kind of thing where you want to say something outrageous just to, just to get some media features. Back in the SEO industry back in the day, one of the big things people would come up with was making the proclamation that SEO is dead. Now, I think we are getting to the point where that may actually be the case soon. But, 5, 10, 15 years ago, it was nowhere near being a reality. But every so often, about every 12 to 18 months, some big industry expert would come out and say, oh, SEO is dying or SEO is dead. And of course, everybody comes out of the woodwork to tell that person what an idiot they are, creates tons of publicity. Lots of people will mention it. Lots of people will cite it in articles, in podcasts, in video, etc. But it's disingenuous. And those people all got called out because they didn't actually believe that. Like, if you really thought SEO was dead, why would you continue running an SEO agency, right? So that hurt their credibility because they made a claim purely from the perspective of, saying an outrageous thing just to get attention. The other, of course, is if your take is not based in logic, you could lose credibility. So Jim Cramer is a huge example of this. He makes these stock picks on, I think he was on CNN, if I remember correctly. He had a financial TV show where he would give people investing advice. And pretty consistently, he has been wrong on most of his investing advice. The stocks that he recommended buying usually underperformed quite a bit, and the ones that he recommended getting rid of usually grew quite well very often as well. So his advice was not based on logic. It was based on emotions. It was based on silly things. And because of that, nobody trusts Jim Cramer. His credibility is dead. In fact, there's a lot of memes that you'll see going around where, if Jim Cramer recommends selling a stock, everyone starts talking about buying it. Or if he talks about buying a stock, everyone starts talking about selling it or even shorting it. So your kind of originality, the things you're doing to stand out and be different, has to actually make sense, right? It can't just be a thing you're just doing because you think it's going to get attention. So a contrarian position is a great way to do this, but you just have to approach it the right way. We have to make sure that it is based in logic and that you do actually believe whatever it is you're saying. Now, controversy is great because it does create a lot of exposure, but you're going to need thick skin if you're going to do this. So people will share it, whether to support their own views or to criticize your views. And more often, you're going to get the latter. It's going to be people criticizing you. That's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Criticism is good. I always say it's better to be hated than to be ignored. So don't shy away from it just because people are going to attack you. I look at that as an opportunity to drive a lot of engagement. Plus, of course, the controversy tends to pick up headlines. This also leads to a lot of debates in the replies, and that plays a big role in the algorithms, right? The more engagement that's going on, the more likely that your content is going to be seen by other people because the algorithm is going to start pushing it up so that more people see it. But don't be an asshole just for the sake of being contrarian, right? You don't have to be a dick. You don't have to say something completely outrageous. This is going to be a case-by-case basis, depending on your industry, depending on your personality, depending even on the topic at hand. But there's not really a benefit in being an ass just to try and be contrarian. So you could be contrarian without being an ass. You're just going to have to decide what makes sense for you based on those different factors, right? Your personality, your industry, the topic. All right, guys. So we're going to roll into the next segment here, and we're going to talk about 3 types of content that shows journalists you are the kind of expert they should feature. Now, this is one of those things where we all should be creating a ton of content anyway. This is something that we use in our marketing. It's something we use to get in front of our prospects. But the other side of this is journalists use your content to determine if you're actually an expert, right? They don't care about the content itself. They are going to look at your content, whether it's social media, YouTube, a blog, a newsletter, whatever. And they're going to use that to determine if you are a legitimate expert. And so the way that you do that is by going deep on the topic, explaining the nuance, breaking things down in a way that the typical person can understand. And this is important because anybody can claim to be an expert, but when you can demonstrate it, you've now elevated yourself into a class higher than most other people in your industry. And this is something that they do because their job is on the line with each piece of content they put out. So every article that a journalist does or every TV segment, their reputation is on the line. If they cite somebody who's not actually an expert, or they're a bad person for whatever reason, or some other issue, that could put their job in jeopardy. So they are going to look you up online before they include a quote from you. They're going to make sure, to the best of their ability, that you are a legitimate expert. So this is why it's so important to create great content consistently on social media. So what type of content can you produce that is going to show a journalist that you are a highly qualified expert? Well, one of the first ones, and I've done a lot on this area back when I was in the SEO industry, is predictions. Now, if you're going to make a prediction, it has to be clear and specific, right? What's going to happen? Who's going to be involved? Why will it happen? What will be the outcome? Things like this. We're going to take all of the variables that may potentially matter and break this down in the content. So, you see a lot of people in the real estate space right now doing this, right? They're talking about some of the data that's going on, like interest rates, inflation, wages, and they're taking this data to predict what's going on in the housing market over the next 6, 12, 18 months. And in doing that, they're getting a lot of attention, right? They are breaking down details that the average person, let's say you're not in the real estate industry, you may see some of that data floating around here and there, but you don't know what to do with it. You don't know what it means to you as a potential home buyer or even as an investor in some cases. So when you can take all of this data that exists and use it to create a prediction of what's going to happen, that's the kind of thing that shows a journalist that you have a very deep understanding of your industry, because not everyone can do that, right? Taking data and making a logical and relevant prediction as to what that data is going to mean to that industry really sets you apart. Like I said, most people can't do that. So this is a great type of content to create to really demonstrate your expertise. Analysis is another one. So again, we want to be very specific here. So we might be talking about a particular situation. We might be talking about a law or a regulation. We might even be talking about a company or an organization. But we take what's going on and we analyze what that means for the industry. We analyze how that's going to impact people. We analyze what opportunities or threats that may create down the road. And that really, again, shows your forward thinking. It shows that, yes, you're in the trenches, you're doing the work, but you also are kind of above and you've got this bigger picture and you see things that others don't. And so it's a great way to demonstrate your expertise. Tutorials are another type of content. And this is the one that I really love because you're showing people how to do a thing, right? Now, if you're going to do this, you want it to be comprehensive. It needs to teach exactly how to perform some task. And I say task, not your entire industry, not the entire career that you've built. So let's look at some of my content, for example. If I was going to create a post on social media, I'm probably not going to write a post about how to become a recognized authority in your industry. because that is a number of smaller tasks that have to all be combined to get to that. But I might create a piece of content about how to build a strong personal brand, for example, or how to pitch a journalist, right? How to write a great pitch that gets attention, how to control the search results. Like there's a lot of little elements of public relations that I could create content around. When you create content around a specific task, you want to give them everything that they need to perform that task, right? A lot of people will make the mistake of trying to hold back a little bit, right? Well, I need to keep this information or they won't need me. I talked earlier about how that's bullshit. That's not really a thing that you need to be worried about. People who are going to hire you are going to hire you, and the people who aren't. But by providing this information in great detail, you're showing them all of the things that they didn't think about. You're showing them all of the knowledge that you have that others don't. We also want to make sure that when we're doing this, it's very clear and easy to understand. So we are all immersed in our industries to the point where we take a lot of knowledge for granted. This is something I had a problem with in my own content many, many years ago. I've always been a very technical person. And so I would often assume other people, other entrepreneurs especially, had that same level of technical proficiency. Usually they did not. So in a lot of my early content, 20 something years ago, I would find, in hindsight, that I would talk above people. I would leverage concepts that they hadn't even seen yet. I would take certain information for granted. And unfortunately, that information was required to understand the next concept. So a lot of times my content wasn't really understood by people because I was approaching it from my own knowledge, not from my audience's knowledge. So we want to make sure to bring it down to a level that people outside of our industry, people who don't do what we do all day, can read that or listen to that and make perfect sense from it, right? And that's a great way to really demonstrate our expertise. So those are some of the ways that you can create some killer content that is not only going to help you get in front of your prospects and convince them that you're the right person to work with, but also show journalists that you are an absolute expert in your field and that you're the type of person that they should feature in their content, whether it's articles, whether it's TV segments, whatever. All right, guys, next up, we are going to talk about why you need a powerful origins story to stand out. Now, we've talked about a few different things so far this morning, how to answer a journalist question in a way that they're going to want to include your quote, how to create content that journalists will see that you're the expert. But there's another aspect to this, and that is your origin story. So you've got great information, you've got demonstration that you're an expert. Now we need to make you stand out. We need to make you the kind of person that is interesting, right? We don't want you to star in a Dos Equis commercial. You don't need to be the most interesting man alive, but you do need to have something unique about you, something that makes you different, something that people can relate to. Now, this is important because storytelling activates a part of the brain that produces oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is a hormone in your body that causes you to feel trust. So when we leverage storytelling, we're causing people to release oxytocin, which then causes them to trust us. Now, it's hardwired into our brains. It's not like, oh yeah, I don't let that affect me. Like that's not a thing, right? This is something that affects everybody. So when we leverage storytelling, we're inducing trust. Now, this also helps people to relate with you. If you're telling a story, if you're sharing your background, who you are, how you got to be the way that you are, that helps people to relate to you. Now, they need to know why they should care before they will. And in this storytelling process, they don't care about what you do or how your industry works yet until they know that until they know that there's a reason to, right? And then the other cool thing about this storytelling aspect is that it helps to build hope. So, people see kind of your journey. They see what you've been through, what you've overcome, what you've learned from all of that, and they can picture themselves in that story. So it creates that sense of optimism in them. And that, coupled with the trust, is huge in developing that authority status. The other cool thing about this is that it allows you to explain how things work to them without boring them, right? And we have to remember that they just want the results or the outcome. They don't care how your process works. They don't care what you do. All they really care about is that end result. It's the whole concept behind, nobody's buying a drill bit. They're buying the ability to make a hole. Same thing applies here, but storytelling allows you to keep them engaged while you're showing them how you'll provide that outcome, right? How are you going to provide those results for them? Now, in this case, why you do what you do is more important than what you do. There's a right way and a wrong way to tell this story, right? We've all seen the internet marketing douchebags, the guys with the Lambos and boats and money pictures, and everything is focused on ego. That does not work. Authentic marketing is what works. So if you look at some of the most successful brands, the most successful personal brands, they are built on authentic people. So, somebody like Tony Robbins or Alex Hormozi. Hormozi is a great example. I've been reading a bunch of his books lately. And when he tells his story, it's not about, hey, here's how amazing I am. It's, hey, here's this fucked up journey that I had, all these ups and downs, and here's what I learned from it. And now here's what you can benefit from this, right? And that's the right approach. We want to be authentic. We want to tell our story. We want to use our story to show others how the same is possible for them. So how do you come up with this origin story? Well, the short answer is you don't. It already exists. You just have to distill it down. But you have to make it engaging and short enough that they don't tell you to shut the fuck up. Now, you already know how to do this. You've seen it hundreds, if not thousands of times. Every single Hollywood movie you've ever seen follows this same format. So the way every movie starts off is everything is good or great, or it's perceived as that. And then something happens to change that. The hero, the main character, whatever you want to call them, they try to solve the problem, but they're not quite ready. Maybe they don't have the courage, they don't have the knowledge or the money or the tools. Whatever it is they need to accomplish that, they don't yet have. So now they have to go on this crazy side quest to get whatever it is they need to actually accomplish that. Along the way, of course, they face some other challenges, which they have to overcome. A lot of times they'll face other losses along the way. A lot of times they'll also meet somebody along the way who now becomes a valuable ally. And then they come back to the original problem as the movie's getting close to an end, right? And now they've got this new information, these new resources, these new friends, and now they're able to solve the problem. They save the day, they end up in a better place, and things are never going back to what they were, right? All of you have a story just like that. You just have to figure out what it is and then distill it down into something concise and powerful that shows how you are different and how you are uniquely qualified to solve a particular problem for people. So some of the things that I look at when we develop this story, which we call this a core positioning statement. It's basically an encapsulation of, who you are, what you do, why you do it, who you do it for, and how you do it, right? So some of the questions that you want to ask to uncover this information is, why do you do what you do, right? That's the first thing. That's the most important thing. That is foundational. The reason behind what you do is absolutely critical because it shapes your entire mission. Then you want to look at what were you doing before moving into this role. So for most of us, it's an entrepreneurial role. What were you doing that led you to leave that stable 9-to-5 job or that destitute financial situation or whatever, and now start your business. And now you're doing this thing, you're doing it well, you're doing it for awesome people and helping them do whatever they're trying to do. What were you doing before making that move? And while you're breaking that down, look at how was your life and your business at that time before you made the move. Then next, we want to look at what problem led to you moving into this role. In my case, I had a health crisis that nearly killed me. Spent 2 years on my deathbed and had to start over. That's a pretty damn big problem. And so I use that when I'm talking about my journey, because it is relevant and it shows certain character traits. It shows, what led me here. It shows what I've overcome. So identify the problem that caused you to make that change. Then look at what you learned from the experience, both good and bad. And I guarantee you there's a bunch of both. And when you can uncover that, you're now uncovering things that help you be more effective for your clients. But also the same applies for the audience of these media outlets. Then we want to look at how do you now serve people in this role, right? What unique insight do you have? How are you uniquely qualified? What benefits does somebody get from working with you versus somebody else because of your experience throughout this journey? And then finally, we want to look at what is your mission, right? What are you singularly focused on? What do you want to achieve in your business, in serving people, in doing what you do? Now you take all of that information, and it's going to be a lot of information. If you're doing this the right way, you're going to uncover probably pages and pages of information. So if we take all of this information and distill it down into a few sentences, that gives you one hell of a core positioning statement that uniquely positions you separate from most of your competitors, right? Most people don't go through this. They don't put forth the effort to create this story, or rather to distill this story and turn it into something powerful that they can use. So if you do this, it's going to put you in a very different world. And so when you start reaching out to journalists and pitching them your story, and you've got the great information, you've got the stats, you've got an emotional hook, you've got everything solid in that pitch, you're probably up against other people who have a lot of that other information right. But if you've got this killer story behind you as well, now that gives you something compelling. That gives you an edge over the other people who are trying to get featured in the same stories that you are. And it gives you a tremendous advantage. All right, guys. So that's a wrap for that segment. Before we jump into Jeremy's PR PSA, I'm going to share a funny little example of phrasing. For those of you who may be familiar with the game Fortnite, they recently released some skins, which they are calling Fantastic Four skins, into the game Fortnite. Now, a little bit of context here. For those of you who are not into games, Fortnite is basically a kids game. There's probably lots of adults that play it as well. And they incorporate a lot of pop culture references into their games. Movie characters, musicians, all kinds of odds and ends things into the game. And so in this case, we've got the Fantastic Four, which I think has either just come out or it's about to come out. Fortnite has partnered with whichever movie studio was that did this, and they are calling this the Fantastic Foreskins. Definitely humor that a 12-year-old boy can appreciate. The vast majority of their audience is, younger, definitely more male than female. I don't know if this is an intentional move or if it was just an accident. Either way, it's created a shitload of publicity for them. Everybody on social media is talking about it. It's been cited in numerous articles and is creating a ton of publicity that's driving people to the game. Now, whenever they work in these new characters, which they cycle in and out of the game pretty frequently, there's always a bit of a blow up about that topic. But this one is one that I have seen generate a lot more attention than any of the previous ones. And I would say that a large part of that is because of this 12-year-old humor in this particular post. So great example, whether it's on purpose or not, it's created a ton of publicity for them. And this is the kind of thing that you can do, if you just are kind of, clever, you're good with words, you can see the funny little puns in things. I would encourage you guys to take advantage of opportunities like this, because every industry has a bunch of them. There's a lot of cool ways to play with this concept. And it's definitely something that will help you guys create a bunch of exposure. So look for opportunities to play with words and say things unexpected that maybe don't seem like what your original message was, and you'll see a lot more engagement. All right, so we're going to close out today's segment with Jeremy's PR PSA, and that is, it's not enough to be better. If you want to stand out and be seen as a recognized authority in your industry, you have to be different. Now, this is something I have talked about. Like I said, I wrote an article about this in Entrepreneur. I've talked about it a lot. This is really a critical part of your public relations efforts, right? Every aspect of your marketing hinges on you being different. Just being the best is not enough. Although everybody says they're the best, is anybody actually the best? No, not really. That's constantly fluctuating. But just being great isn't enough. You need a reason for people to be drawn to you. You need a reason for people to be passionate about you. And this is where that differentiation comes in. So leverage your own personality, leverage your own backstory, right? Your journey, the things that you've accomplished and overcome, and everything that you've been through, and use that to set yourself apart from your competitors. That's going to not only result in you getting more media features, which of course blows everything else up in your business in a positive way, but it also makes all of your marketing much more effective. So this is something that we absolutely need to do. It is a game changer, and so few people are doing it. So if you do, you're going to have a huge advantage over most of your competitors. All right, everyone, that is a wrap for today. Hope you guys got a lot out of this episode. If you did, I would love it if you'd share this on social media, drop us a comment, whether in the Facebook group or on X or YouTube or wherever we are. And then I will see you guys on the next episode. Thanks, everyone.